Early on Sunday, hostilities broke out in Azerbaijan. Mexican authorities issue arrest warrants for suspects linked to the disappearance of 43 ayotzinapa students. And Palestinians continue rallying against the normalization of ties between Israel and sub-Arab states. Hello and welcome to TeleSUR. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, Ecuador, and this is from the south. Early on Sunday, hostilities broke out between Azerbaijan and Armenia over the long-disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. Both Baku and Yerevan have traded blame over who started the fighting, which has so far caused a number of military and civilian casualties, including at least one child. Sunday clashes are being described as the worst since 2016 and have raised the specter of a war between two nations locked in a decades-long territorial dispute over the region of Nagorno-Karabakh. For their part, the Turkish government has thrown their support behind Azerbaijan, blaming Armenia for playing with fire. On the other hand, the Russian government has urged the two former Soviet republics to stop their fighting and offered to carry on mediation efforts. Meanwhile, the president of the de facto Republic of Artsakh has declared martial law and a total military mobilization across the entire region of Nagorno-Karabakh.
In the conditions of martial law, in a few minutes I will sign a decree on general mobilization and call on the entire population to unite around the government of Artsakh and Armenia. Most of all people of Artsakh everywhere want peace. We have already said that the responsibility for any resumption of the war will rest with the government of Azerbaijan, today and tomorrow and in the future.
And the Armenian Prime Minister has also ordered a nationwide martial law and called on all members of the nation's army reserve to report to their conscription offices. At the heart of the decades-long conflict lies the contested region of Nagorno-Karabakh, a predominantly ethnic Armenian territory that was merged with Azerbaijan back in 1921 by Soviet authorities. But following the collapse of the USSR in 1991, Armenian separatists seized the region in a move supported by Yerevan. The ensuing war left 30,000 dead and forced hundreds of thousands from their homes. Following a ceasefire agreement mediated by Russia and the US, sporadic fighting has erupted over the years, most recently in 2016, when at least 110 people were killed. Well, during the UN General Assembly, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Timothy Harris, warned UN member nations that the world shouldn't forget about fighting climate change in the midst of the pandemic, especially as hurricane season has started in the Caribbean.
Given our economic and environmental vulnerabilities as a small island developing state, we are likely to be confronted with the multiplier effect of the pandemic, particularly as we brace for the most intense segment of the hurricane season. Mr. President, St. Kitts and Nevis is the smallest independent nation in the Western Hemisphere, and the impact of climate change weighs heavily on our daily lives. At this point in time, we are in the most active part of the hurricane season, at the mercy of Mother Nature. And for this reason, climate change will always be high on our agenda. Climate change for us is not something to be postponed for tomorrow. Indeed, it must be addressed like yesterday. We must regain the momentum and continue our work to consolidate the gains made so far.
The Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Alan Chastanet, said small island developing states face existential circumstances and yet are still asked to disproportionately carry the burden of major shocks like a pandemic and climate change.
We cannot continue to attend meetings to discuss solutions within the current framework. We must first agree the global economic development architecture has to change. New forms of measurement and criteria must be adopted that are going to allow SIDS the opportunity to help ourselves all we are asking for is a fair chance. That is, unless the new normal was always just a cliche, or it doesn't actually mean something. If we agree and accept that there is a new normal, then the criteria used before simply does not apply. We are at a crossroads, a pivotal moment for a meaningful course correction. We must choose the difficult and uncomfortable road to finally re-engineer the international system, to enable and to ensure fair, inclusive, and relevant policies and solutions for all.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Keith Rowley, called on the United Nations to continue to support the CARICOM initiative of peaceful dialogue between the Venezuelan government and the opposition.
We ask the member nations of the UN to continue to support the CARICOM initiatives, encouraged by Norway and Barbados, to bring all elements in Venezuela to accept dialogue and human rights as their guiding lights, as we look forward to fair and peaceful elections there in the near future, and trust that a satisfactory outcome would lead to a resumption of normalcy in our Caribbean shores as we all aspire together to achieve together in this region.
The Deputy Prime Minister of Syria, Walid Muallim, has condemned the fact that political agenda often takes precedence over humanitarian issues, even in the middle of a pandemic. He also criticized the TeleSUR Syria Civilian Protection Act imposed by the United States against the government.
As the COVID-19 pandemic rages across the world, unilateral coercive measures imposed on the Syrian people and other peoples are being renewed instead of lifted. New measures, such as the so-called TeleSUR Syria Civilian Protection Act, are being added under false pretexts. The TeleSUR Syria Civilian Suffocation Act would have been a more fitting name. When the delivery of life-saving medications and medical equipment is blocked in the middle of a pandemic, does that really protect civilians, or does it deprive them of treatment? When efforts to rebuild Syria after the destruction brought by terrorists are obstructed, does that really serve Syrians, or does it reduce employment, worsen living conditions, and prevent the return of refugees and IDPs? When wheat fields are burned down, oil fields are looted, and the energy sector is targeted, does that really protect civilians? Or does it deny them access to food, heating, gas, and electricity? I could go on, but I think it's clear that the real purpose of the act is to put pressure on Syrians, their livelihoods, and their daily lives.
Moving on, the Belarusian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vladimir Makeï, slammed Western countries for criticizing the fair and free election, which saw President Alexander Lukashenko re-elected for a sixth term.
We note with regret the increasing attempts by a series of countries to abuse the UN platform, including the Security Council, to further their own narrow political interests. This includes some Western nations focusing their attention on the situation in Belarus, which indeed has become complex by dint of circumstances imposed upon us, primarily from elsewhere. I would recall that in August of this year, the people made their choice during the presidential elections in the Republic of Belarus. They chose a stable and prosperous state. They chose peace and good neighbourly relations. They chose sustainable development. However, rather than respecting this choice, we are seeing attempts to destabilise the situation in the country. Following unsuccessful attempts to impose colour revolutions on us, we are now experiencing external interference, aiming to undermine the very construction of our state. Statements brimming with cynicism have been made by a series of our Western colleagues about their alleged concern for Belarusian sovereignty and well-being. In actual fact, they are nothing other than attempts to bring chaos and anarchy to our country.
South African environmental activists rallied in Cape Town to demand government action on climate change. The activists braved rainy weather and gathered outside Parliament, calling on the government to take urgent action on key climate change issues. They also urged South Africa's national power company Eskom to start using more renewable sources of energy.
And we're here to kind of raise awareness about all the crises that are going on globally, where our environment is being destroyed, and we forget that that's our home, and we're here to hopefully raise awareness to create some change.
Ethiopia has assured neighboring countries Egypt and Sudan that its mega dam construction will not affect them. The Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's assurance comes after months of negotiations failed to produce any agreement on the construction. Downstream countries such as Egypt, which depends on the Nile River for nearly 90% of its freshwater supplies, have expressed concerns that the project will affect them economically, especially Ethiopia, which has said that the dam is vital for solving the country's power shortages.
I want to make it abundantly clear that we have no intention to harm these countries. What we are essentially doing is to meet our electricity demands from one of the cleanest source of energy. We cannot afford to continue keeping more than 65 million of our people in the dark. I want to assure that we are firm in our commitment to addressing the concerns of downstream countries and reaching a mutual beneficial outcome in the context of the ongoing African Union-led process.
An African court has given a green light for the former Ivory Coast President Laurent Gbagbo to take part in the upcoming elections. His candidacy was rejected by the country's Constitutional Council on grounds that he was handed a 20-year jail term last November over corruption. The African court based in Tanzania also said Gbagbo's conviction should not be included on his judicial record until a full judgment is delivered on him. Gbagbo was president from 2000 to 2010. We have more stories coming up. Don't go away. Welcome back. On the 6th anniversary of the disappearance of the 43 students from Ayotzinapa, the Mexican president has announced that prosecutors ordered the arrest of military personnel suspected of being involved in the crime. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador made the announcement during a special news conference along with the parents of the students. He also said there will be no impunity for anyone who is found to have had responsibility in the students' disappearance.
They say that our boys were handed over to criminals. We are not interested in that. They were taken away by police, by the military. There were videos, photos. They operated the Communications Coordination Center. Where is all this evidence? Where did it go? And when will it reach the military?
For more, let's turn to our correspondent in Mexico City, Eduardo Martinez.
On Saturday, at 10 a.m., President Andrés Manuel López Obrador provided a report from the National Palace, accompanied by the parents of the 43 students who disappeared from Ayotzinapa. The Subsecretary for Human Rights and the Commissioner for Truth and Justice in the Ayotzinapa case also participated in the report. While other authorities were also present, the President of the Supreme Court of Justice was not, as the Ayotzinapa parents have questioned the roles of judges in the investigation, alleging they have allowed the release of key subjects in the case. One of the main points that was made in the report today was the reveal that arrest warrants have already been issued against military personnel who allegedly participated in the events of September 26 and 27 back in 2014 in the municipality of Iguala in the state of Guerrero. On the other hand, the Attorney General announced that Tomás Cero de Lucio, who was the director of the Criminal Investigation Agency and was in charge of the Ayotzinapa case, is now a fugitive. The AG added that they are in talks with authorities in the country in which Cero de Lucio is located in order to extradite him. In addition to this, the prosecutor said that the conclusion reached by the previous administration on the case was a historical lie. Tomás Cero de Lucio was also being sought for allegedly illegally stealing over $1 billion pesos from the Attorney General's office.
Eduardo Martinez bringing us that report. The recent murder of a transgender woman at the hands of Colombia's military forces has restarted a debate over the restructuring of the armed forces. Now, this comes on top of anti-police brutality protests that left over a dozen dead in recent weeks.
Juliana Giraldo is victim number 38 to be murdered by Colombia's public security forces in 2020. Those who were with Juliana during her final hours say that the soldiers climbed out the tall grass and ordered them to stop, after which they opened fire. This all happened as the victims passed through the Miranda rural zone in the department of Cauca.
When they opened fire, they first hit our car's tires. I got down, but I was hit on my ear. And then I saw the girl seated in front of me had been killed.
According to experts, acts such as this violate all possible human rights and in turn showcase why a complete restructuring of the armed forces is desperately needed.
The internal enemy's logic is that of a Cold War, which is emblematic of the School of the Americas. Whoever takes to the streets to protest is called a left-wing instigator, working for Cuba and Venezuela.
Following Juliana's murder, social organizations held a sit-in outside the barracks in the city of Cali, but they were met by police brutality despite the peaceful nature of their protest.
During our sit in a motorcycle, driven by a civilian with a police officer as passenger, tried to run over some of us. Once we stopped them, an altercation occurred and the officer opened fire, which angered the protesters. They risked their lives to stop him.
For its part, the administration of President Ivan Duque has continued to ignore requests for justice and an end to impunity for security forces.
In other news, Brazil's COVID-19 death toll has surpassed 140,000 and has registered over 4.6 million confirmed cases so far. 7 months after the first reported case hit the country, Brazil has shown no signs of containing the disease. This comes as the administration of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro has continuously downplayed the risk posed by the coronavirus.
It's very sad, not only for Brazil, but for the world. The number of people who have died a cruel death, with their family unable to even say a decent goodbye.
The coronavirus is really dangerous, and those who dismiss it, who go out or go to bars, are at risk. Look at my parents. They were fine until from one night to another, they got sick. And now we are here at the cemetery.
We're taking one last break, but stay where you are. Welcome back. Palestinian citizens in the city of Tubas, located in the occupied West Bank, mobilized against the normalization of relationships between Israel and a number of Arab states. The mobilization was also in support of the Palestinian leadership, as citizens say they stand behind President Mahmoud Abbas. This comes days after Fatah and Hamas agreed to hold the first Palestinian elections since 2006 within the next 6 months.
We will not accept anyone coming on an American or Israeli tank. The Palestinian people have their own independent will. The Palestinian people have paid a heavy price for this independent will. Therefore, our institutions choose our president, our legislative council, and national council. The entire Palestinian people supports the president.
There is no peace, nor negotiations, nor normalization but the will of the Palestinian people. These governments are not important. We count on the people of the Emirates, the people of Bahrain, and the people of the world at this particular time.
On Saturday, thousands took to the streets of Taiz in Yemen to celebrate the 58th anniversary of the September 26th revolution. The national holiday commemorates the beginning of the 1962-1970 North Yemen civil war between supporters of the Yemen Arab Republic and backers of the Mutawakkilit Kingdom. The conflict, which saw the country become a republic, was sparked by a coup executed by revolutionary Republicans on September 26, 1962, to overthrow the last king of Yemen, Mohammed al-Badr. The royalist side was supported by Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, while the Republicans received the support of Egypt and the Soviet Union. Several protesters have been arrested by Israeli police following a demonstration demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The protesters had gathered again outside Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem, insisting that he steps down as he's facing corruption trial. The citizens defied a previous directive by Netanyahu to stop the protest due to COVID-19, 3 months after demonstrations started. The remains of Chinese soldiers who died in South Korea during the war with the United States in 1950 are set to be repatriated. South Korea will hand over the remains of more than 100 soldiers to China on Sunday. The volunteers died fighting alongside the Democratic People's Republic of Korea against U.S. aggression. More than 180,000 Chinese soldiers died during the war, but very few of them were buried in China. The President of the United States has nominated Kony Barrett to the Supreme Court following the death of Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg last week. Kony Barrett currently serves as a federal judge on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago. Her nomination comes as Republicans rush to consolidate a conservative majority.
Today it is my honor to nominate one of our nation's most brilliant and gifted legal minds to the Supreme Court. She is a woman of unparalleled achievement, towering intellect, sterling credentials, and unyielding loyalty to the Constitution, Judge Amy Kony Barrett.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I am Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.